Alrighty, we're underway then. Session 13 starts on page 110 of your workbook. Let's take a look at where we've been. We're in the third major section of the class. Now last week we saw that the position of the framers of the Balfour Declaration. What was in their thinking when they put together the Balfour Declaration? That's summed up by Prime Minister David Lloyd George in this statement: the notion that Jewish immigration would have to be artificially restricted in order to ensure that the Jews should be a permanent minority never entered into the heads of anyone engaged in framing the policy. And so the idea of Jewish restrictions on the Jewish national home, was not part of the Balfour Declaration. But restrictions began quite soon. First, when Winston Churchill was the colonial secretary, he made a trip to the mandated area, Palestine, and he met with Emir Abdullah, the leader of the Hashemite tribe. And he had just been kicked out of Saudi Arabia by the Saudis. So he talked with Emir Abdullah and said, wouldn't it be nice if you ruled in Transjordan? He went to London and brought that idea to London. London said, fine. Emir Abdullah accepted the deal, and he became the leader of Transjordan. And so now the area allocated for the Jewish national home in 1920, Palestine, both sides of the Jordan River, was now restricted. All of a sudden, Palestine was now limited to the western side of the Jordan River, and the eastern side of the Jordan River suddenly became Transjordan, with Hussein ruling there. So the British have now reinterpreted the Balfour Declaration. The Jewish national home is now about 25% of its original territory. However, restrictions didn't stop there. Due to Arab unrest, the mandate, the leader, the High Commissioner of the mandate, the Jewish guy, what was his name now? I forget his name here. Samuel, Sir Herbert Samuel, yes. Went to England, and he felt that further restrictions were needed on the Jewish population in Palestine. And so Sir Winston Churchill had him draft a interpretation of the mandate over his signature. And that came out as the Churchill White Paper, and supposedly was a definitive definition of British policy in Palestine. Here's what the Balfour Declaration really means. And we read this area, and I'm going to just repeat the very end of this section that we read last week. The British government stated that unauthorized statements have been made to the effect that the purpose in view is to create a wholly Jewish Palestine. Well, isn't that the position David Lloyd George took? Is that an unauthorized statement from the Prime Minister? A wholly Jewish Palestine was in the minds of the people who put together the Balfour Declaration. Phrases have been used, such as that Palestine is to become as Jewish as England is English. And of course, that was Chaim Weizmann's understanding. So he understood that no restriction should be put on a Jewish national home. But here's the summary. His Majesty's government regard any such expectation as impractical and have no such aim in view. So here the Jewish national home is under attack. Well, remember, the British really did quite well in Palestine as the mandated power. They improved the conditions in Palestine by quite a bit. For example, the international airport was created at Lydda, known today as the Ben Gurion Airport in Lod or Lydda. Technion, on the Jewish side of things, Technion, the Jewish Institute of Technology, got founded. It started in 1912 and was finally opened in 1925. Hebrew University was inaugurated in 1925 as well. And then in 1929, there erupted Arab riots over the permission to allow the Jews to pray at the Western Wall. And this is the way the Western Wall looked for most until 1967. It was just a little easement, a little alleyway where Jewish people could come up against the remnants of Herod's platform, leveling off Mount Moriah. And the Palestinians accused the Jews then of trying to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that same argument continues today. For example, this article from Israel National News. Palestinian religious leaders, Jews must not pray at the Kotel. The Kotel is the Western Wall. And this was March 27th, 2014. The Palestine Authority claims the Western Wall of the Temple Mount is part of Al-Aqsa Mosque and therefore off limits to the Jews. So if you're not familiar with this, let me just point out what's going on here. Here is the Temple Mount. Now this is Al-Aqsa Mosque proper, the mosque at the southern end of the Temple Mount with the gray dome. Now here is the Western Wall Prayer Plaza. This is where the Jews are allowed to pray, that tiny little segment of the Western Wall. But the Muslims claim that because Al-Aqsa is on the Temple Mount, the whole Temple Mount is now a mosque. And so if you, anywhere on that Temple Mount, you do anything, you're attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque, okay? This was never, according to them, the Temple Mount. This is always Islamic. Never was a Temple Mount there. It was always Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's their position, as they, of course, revise history. The article continues. Allah decreed that the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque is Islamic and belongs to Muslims alone. It is part of the religious belief of 1.5 billion Muslims, and the Jews have no right to it. And again, here's that same, I'm going to show you that again. Here is Al-Aqsa Mosque, southern end of the Temple Mount. And over to the left, there is the prayer plaza and the Western Wall area where Jewish people pray. But the Muslims claim that everything, that whole thing is a mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's the argument in 1929 right down to today. No party, no matter how much power and international support it has, can change this established fact by giving the Jews any right to it or the right to pray in any part of it. The Al-Aqsa Mosque includes all its courtyards, etc., 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 and specifically its Western Wall. So the argument continues even today. Well, Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald also made a trip to the mandated area, and he came back feeling that British promises to the Arabs and Jews were contradictory. He was not in favor of Jewish immigration. The Colonial Secretary, Lord Pasfield, was very much against Jewish immigration as well, and he told Chaim Weizmann that straight on. And so that brings us now to page 110. Top of page 110 and the Pasfield white paper. Okay, everybody there? All righty. Now in May, London dispatched Sir John Hope Simpson to Palestine. And up on the screen, this is the only picture I could find of Sir John Hope Simpson. Not the highest quality photograph, but you get an idea of what the fellow looked like. So this is Sir John Hope Simpson. Hope Simpson embarked upon 3 months of travel and investigation and aerial surveys of the land holdings. Then he issued a massive 185-page report of his own, October 20th, 1930. It was Hope Simpson's conclusion that the land available to Arabs was less than previously believed. The Arabs, he said, gradually were being driven off the soil by Jewish land purchases and the JNF policy of not reselling to Arabs or allowing them employment in Jewish tracts. And he felt that that was a distinct breach of the mandate. The report doubted Palestine's capacity to sustain any meaningful industrial growth. Now, from the vantage point of 2014, that's pretty funny, isn't it? Pretty crazy. But from his vantage point, maybe it had some virtue. Now, the next sentence is a mark it up moment. So highlight it, underline it. Further measures should be taken to restrict both Jewish immigration and Jewish land purchase. There's that word, restrict again. Hope Simpson expressed his personal belief that when all development schemes were in full operation, there would be room in Palestine for 20,000 additional immigrant families, about 100,000 people, and of these, not more than half should be Jews. So he's really restricting immigration down. The Zionists, shocked and angered, were not tardy in rejecting Hope Simpson's data and conclusions. The man had grossly underestimated the amount of cultivatable land in Palestine, and he overestimated the quantity required either by Arabs or by the Jews. His attempt to blame Jewish immigration for Arab village poverty was libelous and inflammatory. Next two sentences, again, mark it up moments. In contrast, there had been a dramatic rise in Arab living standards as a consequence of Jewish settlements. The irrefutable evidence was that Arab immigrants, no less than the Jews, were flooding into the country as a result of the new economic opportunities provided by the Jewish national home. And that conclusion was reiterated by Joan Peters in her book From Time Immemorial. Remember, I showed you this book at the beginning of the class, written in 1984. When she started this book, she was pro-Palestinian. But as she worked through all the research, she found that the reason the Arab population had increased so much in Palestine during this time was because of Jewish economic opportunities. So it's a good book to have. The Palestinians hate this book because it brings out in all the facts about how the Arabs literally flooded into Palestine. So from time immemorial, that will document all this for you. All right, before these arguments could be marshaled, London released an official statement on the same day, October 20th, that the Hope Simpson report was published. It took the form of a 23-page white paper issued by Lord Passfield. And on page 111, you have this picture. This is the Passfield white paper, a statement of policy by His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom. Palestine, a statement of policy. Well, this document proceeded to skewer virtually every Zionist hope for the future. For example, it stated up on the screen here, there remains no margin of land available for agricultural settlement by the new immigrants, with the exception of such undeveloped lands as the various Jewish agencies hold in reserve. No margin of land available for agricultural settlement? Kathy?
What kind of training did this man have?
I don't know. But it wasn't all that great. Okay? Yeah. Now, that's my next comment. Hope Simpson could probably be excused for his conclusions. Okay, for example, this comes out of Wikipedia. I think this is a good statement. Agriculture in Israel. Agriculture in Israel is a highly developed industry. Israel is a major exporter of fresh produce and a world leader in agricultural technologies, despite the fact that the geography of Israel is not naturally conducive to agriculture. Now, I can imagine Hope Simpson seeing that. More than half of the land area is desert, and the climate and lack of water resources do not favor farming. Only 20% of the land area is naturally arable. So maybe Hope Simpson had some kind of a case, but he didn't count on Jewish ingenuity or God's blessing, did he? And here's an example. This is the Jezreel Valley today. There's some irrigation going on. It's all over the Jezreel Valley today. Look at those vineyards. You know, Israel is blossoming today. There's the Jezreel Valley, a farmland all throughout it. You know, Hope Simpson was wrong. Maybe he was could be excused for his conclusion, but it was not the right conclusion. Now, the paper also stated that Jewish immigration must be suspended as long as extensive unemployment in Palestine continued. Page 111. So, the top of page 111, another mark it up moment. This is a good sentence to mark up. The Passfield White Paper appeared to repudiate the very purpose of the Balfour Declaration and the terms of the San Remo Award. Flew directly in the face of it. It foreshadowed serious immigration restrictions and threatened the Jews with an embargo on additional purchases of land. But more significantly, it commented upon the work of the Jews in Palestine in disparaging terms, omitting altogether to credit the Zionists for the benefits they had conferred upon the country and all its peoples. So it was little wonder that the Arabs expressed general satisfaction with the document. But Jewish reaction was quite different. Outraged, Weizmann immediately resigned as president of the Jewish Agency. Now, I don't know what good that does. People do that. They get upset and I'm going to resign. Oh, what good does that do? But anyway, that was his statement. Okay, you should stick with it and fight. Instead of saying, I'm going to resign, you should say, I'm going to fight this. You know, I don't understand that. All right. Weizmann's was perhaps the most temperate Zionist reaction. The response of the Jewish world in Palestine, Britain, America, was altogether infuriated. Besides letters, petitions, cables of protest, and impassioned newspaper editorials, it took the form of endless individual and collective meetings with British public figures. And some of these public figures hardly needed persuasion that the British government had betrayed a solemn trust. Stanley Baldwin of the Conservative Party promptly disassociated themselves with the Passfield White Paper. Leopold Amory and Winston Churchill cursed, they anathematized the document on the House of Commons. Now, I guess Churchill realized things had gone too far because he supported dividing up the mandated area. But now apparently he understands things are out of line. In a heated parliamentary debate on November 17th, Lloyd George scored MacDonald for breaking the word of England. MacDonald was shaken by the intensity of the attack upon him and the schisms even among his own Labour Party. So the Prime Minister invited Weizmann to lunch on November 6th. And years later, Weizmann's widow published her husband's account of the meeting. The Prime Minister acknowledged errors in his white paper, and then he stated, and you have this in your notes, the errors have to be put right and the misunderstandings to be cleared up. And any new statement which is to be issued in agreement with you. But we cannot simply withdraw the white paper. You know, we have to save face here. 1931. The agreed face-saving device for the policy shift took the form of a letter from the Prime Minister to Weizmann, February 13th, 1931. MacDonald's letter significantly reinterpreted the Passfield White Paper. So we got the Passfield White Paper reinterpreting the Balfour Declaration, and now we're reinterpreting the Passfield White Paper, back and forth, you know. Gee. In effect, the document was a reversal. Here's what it said, again up on the screen. The obligation to facilitate Jewish immigration and make possible dense settlement of Jews on the land is still a positive obligation of the mandate. And it can be fulfilled without jeopardizing the rights and conditions of the other part of the Palestinian population. So, he's totally reversed course here. The letter admitted that the number of Arabs dispossessed was surely less than Hope Simpson had determined and required a more extensive investigation. Meanwhile, it gave assurance that the prohibition of further land purchase by Jews was not government policy. The authority of the Jewish Agency to employ Jewish labor on purely Jewish ventures was confirmed, as was the right of Jewish workers to secure fair share of employment in the mandatory government and in public works projects. In MacDonald's letter, he stated, and again up on the screen, the obligation laid upon the mandatory are solemn international promises, and there is no intention at present, as there was not in the past, of disregarding them. So those are some strong statements. Now the letter did not enjoy the status of a command paper or a colonial office announcement, but MacDonald released it to the press. He transmitted it as an official document to the League, that's the League of Nations, and he embodied it in a dispatch as instructions to the Palestine High Commissioner. Now, Weizmann rightly interpreted it as official, and he hailed it as reestablishing a basis for Zionist cooperation with Britain. It did little, however, to encourage cooperation between Arabs and Jews. The Passfield White Paper and the MacDonald Letter revealed British policy at its worst. And again, here's another mark it up moment. Both documents convinced, and of course both documents are the Passfield White Paper and MacDonald's Letter. Both documents convinced first the Arabs and then the Jews that sufficient agitation and pressure could reverse the intentions of the mandatory. In other words, if you're vocal enough or violent enough, you'll get your way with Britain. With the Arabs, it was through violence. With the Jews, it was vocally. But no matter what you do, if you agitate enough, you'll get Britain to change their mind. Not a good precedent to set. Now, the Arabs did not regard the MacDonald Letter as the final word. The president of the Arab executive, Musa Kazem al-Husseini, wrote to the High Commissioner these words, February 19, 1931. I want to assure Your Excellency that Prime Minister MacDonald's letter has ruined hope of a policy of cooperation between Arabs and Jews, if there existed such a hope. Yeah. And has rendered the possibility of understanding between the two parties absolutely impossible. Sound like today? Sounds like today, doesn't it? All right. 17th Zionist Congress, that took place in Basel, Switzerland. Now we're on page 113. And the split in the Haganah. The Irgun is founded. The Irgun Zvai Le'umi, the National Military Organization, or Etzel for short, originated in 1931 as Haganah Beit, Defense B, Defense Plan B. The Haganah was Defense Plan A. Now the Irgun is Defense Plan B. It's a faction that broke away from the official labor-dominated underground Haganah. Remember, the Histadrut had put that together. Now, the policy of the new organization was based squarely on Vladimir Jabotinsky's teachings. 3 points. Number 1, every Jew had a right to enter Palestine. 2, only active retaliation would deter the Arabs. 3, only Jewish armed force would ensure the Jewish state. The Etzel symbol was a hand grasping a rifle over a map of Palestine, including Transjordan, with the motto, Rakach, only this. And there's the Irgun emblem, the Etzel emblem. And you can see the map of Palestine there, including Transjordan. And below it is the words Rakach, only this. We want all of it. They're the extremists. We want all of it. And to make it clearer, here's an Irgun poster. And again, you can see the hand with the rifle, and there's the map of Palestine, including Transjordan. All of it. That's what we want. So that's the Irgun's position. From the outset, the Jewish agency sternly denounced the Etzel, and the British countered by mass arrests of suspected members. Now, until 1939, the activities of this group generally were limited to retaliation against Arab marauders. But after 1939, Etzel engaged in activities against the mandatory government. When World War II broke out, Etzel announced a cessation of anti-British activities and offered its cooperation with the war effort. But after the war, Etzel received an infusion of new recruits, many of them deserters from the Polish army. So these newcomers were consumed by recent memories of their kinsmen's fate in Nazi Europe. Trained militarily, they were intent upon following an activist policy of resistance. Now, even with these enlarged numbers, Etzel's ranks rarely exceeded 2,000. So they really were a small group of extremists. Even so, the quality of the group's leadership was fanatical. The most famous personality was Menachem Begin. And you have his picture there on page 113. Here's that portrait. Menachem Begin, most famous leader of the Irgun. He commanded Etzel during its most violent phase. Now, he was a Polish Jew. He had been arrested in Soviet Lithuania as a Zionist for Zionist activities in 1941, and he was sentenced to imprisonment. In a Siberian labor camp, he displayed exceptional physical and moral courage against his anti-Semitic fellow prisoners. A year later, he was allowed to enlist in the Polish army. His force was temporarily stationed in Palestine, so he promptly deserted, and he joined the Etzel and rose to its command in December of 1943. Now, Etzel was noted for an unshakable discipline of its members and for ruthlessness. They extorted funds from Jewish businessmen and occasionally executed Jewish informers. So they were extremists, to say the least. Their world was entirely conspiratorial. They had a price on their heads, and they lived under the threat of hanging or long prison terms. And so they adopted false names and moved from one hiding place to another. And for example, here is Menachem Begin's false identity card. There he is. He's got a mustache in that picture. He's going under the name Yonah Koningshofer in this identity card. So this is his false identity card to try and avoid arrest by the British mandatory officials. So we'll look at Etzel again when we come to their more notable military activities. Okay, turn to page 114, and it is now 1:45, so go ahead and take your break, and we'll pick it up on page 114 with 1933. Alrighty, let's pick it up then on page 114 with 1933. Hitler becomes German Chancellor. Anti-Jewish economic boycott in Germany. First concentration camps begin. And immigration from Germany is the basic ideas here. In 1933, Adolf Hitler became the German Chancellor, and with his rise to prominence, dark shadows began to descend on the Jewish world and the Zionist cause. And of course, you have this picture of German Chancellor and Führer Adolf Hitler. Now, just to point out to you, the closer the Jewish state gets to reality, the harder Satan is going to fight against it. And that's exactly what's going to start happening here. Now, Hitler was very interested in gaining influence in the Muslim world. It was his intention to erode the Allied position in a region widely considered as critical to English and French imperial and defensive power. One of those areas was the Suez Canal. Critical area, critical strategic asset. One particularly successful Axis technique of winning favor among the Arabs had its basis in ideology. German diplomats revealed no hesitation whatsoever in publicizing the Nazi anti-Jewish campaign. Hardly a German Arabic language newspaper or magazine appeared in the Middle East without a sharp thrust against the Jews. Upon introducing the Nuremberg racial laws in 1935, Hitler received telegrams of congratulation and praise from all corners of the Arab world. Now, if you're not familiar with the Nuremberg laws, here is a chart that will sum up the Nuremberg racial laws in a nutshell. Now, the Nazis conceived of the world made up of three groups of people: the chosen race, and then the people who have who were not of pure Aryan blood, who have mixed blood, who were still people, but they were suitable to be slaves. You want a copy of this? All right, we'll make a copy of it. Nuremberg laws. Okay, I'll give you a copy of this. All right, so the primary people were the Aryans, pure-blooded Aryans who the Germans wanted as part of their community. Then those of mixed blood were second-class human beings. They were human beings, but they were suitable for slaves. Eastern Europeans, for example, were considered second-class human beings, and the Germans could enslave them. And then there was a class of people that were no longer human beings, the Jews, and these people you got rid of, Jews and other people like them. So if you look at this chart, if you fell into this group, and the chart here is charting your the purity of your bloodline, fully Jewish, or maybe just one ancestor is not Jewish, one person is not Jewish. These were the people that were subhuman, and they should be removed. They should be killed. So if you fell in this group here, you were mixed blood, and you were a human being, but you would be enslaved by the master race, which was here. All right, so that in a nutshell is the Nuremberg racial laws. Okay, make sense? Okay, so the Jewish people are subhuman. That was their perspective. It was a fateful irony, therefore, that transformed Nazi Germany, the self-appointed patron of the Arab world, and the inspiration for Arab right-wing nationalism. Irony transformed Nazi Germany into an involuntary benefactor of Zionist growth and expansion in Palestine. As the temple of persecution mounted in Germany, Jewish immigration to Palestine and other lands grew correspondingly. Nazi leadership favored a policy that would speed the exodus of German Jews. Germany was hardly alone in disgorging its Jews by the tens and thousands. Government-sponsored anti-Semitism was a fact of life in the states of Eastern Europe as well. By 1939, 275,000 Jews fled the Third Reich, and approximately the same amount from Poland, Hungary, and Romania. Between 1932 and 1935, the Jewish population of the Yishuv doubled from 185,000 to 375,000. This was the largest number of Jews immigrating into any country in the world during those years. The majority continued to arrive from Eastern Europe, where the quasi-official Judophobia of the Polish and Romanian governments made life all but insupportable for the Jewish population. For the first time, a significant minority began to arrive from Central Europe as fugitives from Nazi anti-Semitism. This Central European group, by virtue of its culture, skills, and capital imports, set its own unique imprint on what henceforth would be known as the Fifth Aliyah, page 115. Economically, the German-speaking immigrants were the most successful in the history of the Yishuv. The majority of the newcomers, in fact, had been Zionists in their lands of origin. They were committed, they were educated, they were reasonably affluent, and they managed to get back on their feet in Palestine within just a very few years. The most extensive impact of the Fifth Aliyah was the development of larger Jewish urban centers. These now underwent complete transformation. They began taking on the aspect of modern cities. Tel Aviv and its suburbs absorbed not less than half of the new immigrants. Its metropolitan population, including Jaffa, grew from 46,000 at the end of 1931 to 135,000 in 1935. So that's just 4 years. From 46,000 to 135,000, almost 100,000 people. The number of Jews living in Jerusalem rose from 53,000 in 1931 to 70,000 by 1935. Haifa witnessed the opening of a British port in 1933 and the completion of an oil pipeline terminal from the Mosul oil field in 1934. That's in Iraq. The Mosul oil field is in Iraq. The city's Jewish population nearly tripled between 1931 to 1935, from 16,000 to 40,000. Tiberias and Svat absorbed an additional 11,000 Jews during the same period. Petach Tikva, with a population of 18,000, was awarded the status of a city, of a municipality, in 1938. So by 1939, the newcomers of the fifth Aliyah had raised the kibbutz population to 25,000, living in 117 collective settlements, or 5.2% of the Yishuv. Now, urban progress in turn reflected a dramatic infusion of German Jewish funds. German Jewish newcomers brought with them millions in imported capital. They invested this capital in commerce and industry, and these funds launched a significant economic expansion, notably in metal trades, textiles, and chemicals. The number of industrial firms rose from 6,000 in 1930 to 14,000 in 1937, and employed a workforce that grew from 19,000 to 55,000 in the same period. The tempo of growth could be measured by the seven-fold rise in electricity sold for industrial purposes by the Palestine Electric Corporation between 1931 and 1939. During the same period, the nation's other main enterprise, the Palestine Potash Company, registered a six-fold gain in its value of its Dead Sea output. It's known today, the Palestine Potash Company is known today as the Dead Sea Works. Here is their current logo. This is the Dead Sea Works. This is the earliest picture I could find of them, the Palestine Potash Limited, 1945. They're mining the chemical-rich waters of the Dead Sea, primarily for potash, but many other chemicals. And here is the Dead Sea Works today, just a small portion of it. And you can see the Dead Sea and the evaporation ponds out in the background there. And this is the Dead Sea Works at night. It is a thriving concern, going 24/7. It is the fourth largest supplier of fertilizer in the world. So it's a major industry in Israel.
I can't even turn it off. There we go.
Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. Who wants what?
It wasn't ringing.
Yes.
It wasn't ringing.
Yes, I like vanilla.
All right, vanilla. Okay, vanilla. Yes.
Change from ice cream to pizza.
Pizza, that's right. You wanted a slice of pizza. Well, that's an acceptable substitute, too. All right. By the mid-1930s, with trade and new sea and air routes opening in Europe and Asia, optimism for the Yeshuv's economic future appeared solidly based. So Hitler's anti-Semitism actually benefited Israel in the way of immigrants and in the way of economics. Quite ironic, isn't it? 1935, 19th Zionist Congress. That took place in Lucerne, Switzerland. Then, of course, 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed. Restrictive anti-Semitic laws, and we talked about them just a moment ago. 1936, the World Jewish Congress was founded. Now that is a worldwide organization fostering Jewish cooperation, and it is still going today. Here is their current website, the WJC, the World Jewish Congress. Again, it is designed to foster Jewish cooperation worldwide, because we are still scattered all over the world. 1936, Arab riots and strike. It was the unprecedented Jewish immigration of the Fifth Aliyah that provided fuel for the fires of the Arab revolt. By 1936, inflamed by German and Italian propaganda and by the religious prejudice of the Mufti's partisans, Arab fear and hatred assumed uncontrollable dimensions. The Palestine Arab press warned that the British were introducing Jews into the country to push the Arabs into the sea and finish them. Isn't that ironic? That the Zionists were being incited to kill Arabs and to attack and torture Arab women and to defile mosques. So things haven't changed all that much. Page 116. The first acts of violence occurred in a spontaneous and unrelated way during April 1936. Arab bandits stopped a bus and they killed two of its Jewish passengers. The following night, 2 Arabs were murdered as a Jewish act of revenge. Whereupon Arab followers of the militant Sheikh Farhan al-Saada began destroying Jewish property, uprooting Jewish crops, and killing occasional Jewish civilians. Now, in response, the British administration imposed a curfew on Palestine's larger cities and issued other emergency regulations. On April 25th, the Mufti induced several of Palestine's clan leaders to establish an Arab Higher Committee with himself as the president. And on page 116, you have this picture of the Arab Higher Committee. And the fella in the white hat and the dark robe there is the Mufti. He is the president of the Arab Higher Committee. These are all leaders, clan leaders in the area. President Haj Amin loosed a series of grim warnings on the revenge of God Almighty. Now, the initial outburst of Arab violence was then followed by a mass strike against the government's immigration policy, and it was destined to endure for 7 months. It was enforced by the Mufti's strong-arm men. The work stoppage paralyzed government and public transportation services, as well as Arab businesses and much of Arab agriculture. Ironically, one of the most decisive effects was to stimulate the Jewish economy. For the first time, large numbers of Jewish workers supplanted cheaper Arab labor in the Jewish citrus groves. And Jewish produce replaced Arab fruit and vegetables in the markets. So on the other hand, the cost of the strike on the Arabs themselves became increasingly punitive. This will be a pattern repeated over and over again right up to the present time. They do more harm to themselves when they strike out like this. By midsummer of 1936, the intensity of the fighting mounted as Arab irregulars poured into the hill country around Jerusalem, into Galilee, and into Samaria. A majority of them at first were local Palestinians recruited by Haj Amin's agents. But soon, committees for the defense of Palestine were established in neighboring Arab lands. Syrian and Iraqi volunteers began arriving in Palestine at the rate of 200 or 300 a month. Their leader was Fawzi al-Quwaqji, and he played a vital role in the ensuing civil war. You have a picture of him on page 116. Fawzi al-Quwaqji. He was the general, the leader of this civil war. He was a compact, sandy-haired man in his early 40s when the civil war began. He was gruff, he was vigorous, he was endowed with an unquestionable dynamism that he cultivated in open imitation of his hero, Adolf Hitler. That was his hero, yes?
What was the common language between the Jews and the Arabs at that time?
Well, the Arabs speak Arabic even to today. The Jews speak Hebrew. They are both Semitic languages, and they are similar, but they are two different languages. And many are bilingual, Arab and Hebrew. Yeah, still even today. Okay, page 117. During the summer of 1936, it was Quwaqji who organized military training among the Arab nationalists, imposing a single unified command over the disparate rebel forces, and helping smuggle in Axis weapons. Now, his guerrilla technique scarcely varied. It took the form of night assaults on Jewish farms, the destruction of cattle and crops, and the murder of civilians. Yet armed rebellion soon became a tactic of desperation for the Mufti, as the strike's most crippling effects were experienced mainly by the local Arabs. In July 1936, the Iraqi government persuaded the Arab High Command to negotiate an end to the uprising. By then, 20,000 British troops were stationed in Palestine, and 10,000 more were on the way. The High Commissioner allowed it to be known that if the fighting and the strike came to an end, guess what? A royal commission of inquiry would be dispatched to Palestine, and the Arab Higher Committee might present its complaints in the appropriate diplomatic circles. And the offer was accepted. On October 11th, the Arab Higher Committee called off the strike. Work resumed the next day. The guerrilla bands, already severely mauled by the British Army, were permitted to leave Palestine quietly. Fawzi al-Quwaqji departed for Transjordan, and the organized violence died away. By then, some 1,300 casualties had been incurred throughout the country, including 197 Arabs, 80 Jews, and 28 British personnel killed. All right, 1937, the Peel Commission proposes the partition of Israel. November 11th, 1936, the Royal Commission of Inquiry arrived. Number 3 here. Its instructions were to determine the fundamental cause of the unrest, to explore Arab and Jewish grievances, to make recommendations for the future. So déjà vu, isn't it? We've seen this all before. 1921 in response to the riots of 1920. 1930 in response to the uprising in 1929. And now here in 1937. Now the chairman was Lord Robert Peel. Now although the Zionists were hardly delighted to have their national home reevaluated by yet another royal commission, they agreed to cooperate. By contrast, the Arab Higher Committee decided as a matter of strategy to boycott the proceedings. Great wisdom there, isn't it? The commission accepted the setback manfully, and from the day of their arrival, they began collecting whatever evidence they could from British and Jewish witnesses. But once again, the Zionists grievously underestimated the depth of Arab fear and hatred. This came apparent when, at the intercession of Kings Ghazi of Iraq and Ibn Saud, the Mufti and his colleagues decided at the last moment to drop their boycott of the Royal Commission. In their testimony, not one of the Arab spokesmen found redeeming qualities of any kind in the Jewish national home. They denied that the British mandate or Jewish economic growth had brought other than grief to their people. That's their standard complaint. However, the truth is otherwise. Here are some comments from Wikipedia on the Peel Report. According to the Peel Commission report, Arab allegations regarding Jewish land purchases were unfounded. Much of the land now carrying orange groves was sand dunes or swamp and uncultivated when it was purchased. There was at the time of the earlier sales little evidence that the owners possessed either the resources or the training needed to develop the land. Now, from Middle East Forum, from this website, some more comments on the Peel Report. Palestine's Arab population rose from about 600,000 to some 950,000 owing to the substantial improvement in socio-economic conditions attending the development of the Jewish national home. The British authorities acknowledged as much in a 1937 report by a commission of inquiry headed by Lord Peel. Here's what they said. The general beneficent effect, notice that, overall, it was beneficial. The general beneficent effect of Jewish immigration on Arab welfare is illustrated by the fact that the increase in the Arab population is most marked in urban areas affected by Jewish development. A comparison of the census returns in 1922 and 1931 shows that 6 years ago, the increase in Haifa was 86%. The Arab population in Haifa increased by 86%. In Jaffa, 62. In Jerusalem, 37. While in purely Arab towns such as Nablus and Hebron, it was only 7%, and in Gaza, there was a decrease of 2%. So the point is, if the mandate and Jewish economic growth had only caused grief to the Arab peoples, why were they flocking into Israel in droves? Why were they flooding in? Well, they were flooding in because they needed the jobs. And things were improving. Now, it was during Weizmann's testimony in the 51st meeting of the Commission, held in Jerusalem, January 8th, 1937, that the notion of partitioning the country was first broached. Professor Copeland said it at a hearing. Here's what he said. If there is no other way out to peace, might it not be a final and peaceful settlement to terminate the mandate by agreement and split Palestine into two halves? The plain being an independent Jewish state, and the rest of Palestine plus Transjordania being an independent Arab state. Now, Weizmann's reaction was very positive to this. He was the leader of the Zionists. Here's what he said. Weizmann recalled years later, "I saw in the establishment of a Jewish state a real possibility of coming to terms with the Arabs. As long as the mandatory policy prevails, the Arabs are afraid that we shall absorb the whole of Palestine. A Jewish state with definite boundaries, internationally guaranteed, would be something final. Instead of being a minority in Palestine, we would be a majority in our own state, and would be able to deal on terms of equality with our Arab neighbors in Palestine, Egypt, and Iraq." So this idea was looked on favorably by Weizmann. So after 5 months of preparation, the Royal Commission report was issued in July 1937. It filled 404 pages. It contained elaborate maps and statistical studies. It ranked as one of the major documents of British foreign policy. The only feasible solution, the report concluded, was to divide Palestine into two self-governing communities. The report's proposal was for Palestine and Transjordan to be divided into three regions. And you have this map on page 118. It's in color up on the screen. Here are the three regions. Number one, a Jewish state comprising essentially the coastal plain and Galilee. So that's the yellow on the map on the screen. That's the Jewish state. Secondly, a much larger Arab state embracing the rest of Palestine and Transjordan. That's the green area. And Transjordan. Thirdly, the third area, a permanently mandated British enclave, including the Jerusalem-Bethlehem areas and a corridor to the sea, and British bases on Lake Galilee and the Gulf of Aqaba. So that's the red area. So this is the three-way, the tripart division of Palestine, according to the Peel Commission. Now, the proposal was so revolutionary it left most observers stunned. Even more astonishing than the plan itself was the speed with which the British government adopted it. Simultaneously with the publication of the Peel Report on July 7th, London announced its commitment to the recommendations, including the blueprint for partition as the best and most hopeful solution of the deadlock. So what are we witnessing here? All right, here's the beginning. Here's the area allocated for the Jewish National Home, San Remo Conference, 1920. Palestine. Both sides of the Jordan River. But now, in 1921 to 1923, Great Britain reinterprets the Balfour Declaration, and now Palestine is relegated to the western side of the Jordan River, and Transjordan now becomes the eastern side of the Jordan Valley. Now we come to the Peel Partition Plan in 1937. And now the Jewish state is restricted down to this area here. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the shrinking Jewish state. Satan is working overtime to try and destroy it. Page 119. The Mufti and his followers rejected the plan with contempt and ensured that the Arab Higher Committee turned it down. Has anything changed up till today? Total rejection. The Jewish reaction was slow in coming. The Zionist Congress assembled a month after the issuance of the Peel Report. This is the 20th Congress in Zurich. Eventually, the Congress passed a resolution withholding overt approval of the Peel scheme, but empowering the Jewish agency to explore with London the precise terms upon which a Jewish state might be created. In September 1937, at the invitation of the Syrian government, a pan-Arab Congress of some 500 delegates assembled in Bludan, Syria. The theme of the gathering was struck by the chairman, Naji Suwaidi. He stated that Zionism was a cancer. Haven't we heard that today? Standard statement. That the Jewish national home and the Palestine mandate must be terminated immediately in favor of a sovereign Arab state. Unless Jewish immigration were halted forthwith, the Arab nations just might turn their back on the Western democracies in favor of a new alliance. Well, who would that be with? The implication of support for the Axis was plain. We'll join Germany and Italy. And attacks on the Peel Report increased in frequency and in vehemence throughout the entire Arab world. All right, well, we've just come to a couple of minutes to go, so we're going to quit right there. And we'll pick up the Arab Revolt in the middle of page 119 next week. As you can see, things are getting more and more restrictive on the Jewish national home, step by step. All right, and let me pray, and then we'll turn you loose. Father, again, we have seen that tremendous opposition to the Jewish national home. But we've also seen that no matter what tactics are employed or how opposition comes into being, we know the end of the story. We know that you will establish Israel in spite of all the opposition. And that because we know the end of the story, we know that Satan is fighting a hopeless battle. Now, we look forward to the time when your will is finally fully realized in this world, and all this conflict and sin and strife that we experience in this world comes to an end, when justice is done and everything is made right. We look forward to that time, Lord, and we're thankful that just as you were in charge here, and just as you made sure that the Jewish national home was created, in spite of all the opposition, so you will see that your will for our lives will be fulfilled as well. And we're grateful for that. We look forward to that time. And we ask you that your kingdom come. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All righty, we'll see you next week.